Hi, I'm Whitney. I'm the student today, and this is Danae, the teacher. And Danae's going to teach me and you about ATO, which is Authority to Operate. Danae, tell us about yourself.
My name is Danae Lake, and I am a modern compliance architect for VMware. And what we really do is we help clients get through the ATO process with our products. So we help provide that hardening guidance, we provide stick checklists, we provide all that data with regards to how to use VMware products in a safe way so you can get risk acceptance by your authorizing official.
That's amazing. I didn't understand a lot of what you just said, but I think I'm going to understand by the time this is over. Yeah. So let's start by talking about Authority to Operate, ATO, and what problem it's solving. Like, what is it exactly? So, maybe a good definition. And then, why does it exist?
So the authority to operate is really kind of like a type of authorization that you can get out of the risk management framework process. And what the risk management framework process is really trying to solve is, how do I ensure that I'm protecting the confidentiality, the integrity, and availability of a system or the information or anything else you're trying to protect.
Excellent. So already, let's slow down a little bit and tell me that very first sentence, even though you used a term that you defined, let's get that first sentence on the board. So, yeah.
An authority to operate is an approval by an authorizing official to use a system in that authorizing official's live network.
Ooh.
So essentially, any technology you want to add or use, they have to look at it, evaluate its cybersecurity risk, and then that allows them to actually use it with your system, with your operations and everything else.
Okay. I think I got that, but I have some questions.
Good.
So, an authority to operate is an approval by an authorizing official to use a system in that authorizing official's live network. So, I guess what will help me understand this is, can you give me an example of an authorizing official and an example of a system?
So usually that's a designated position as part of
Uh-huh.
the risk management framework process. Um,
Okay.
so I'm going to say my experience is very much like the Army. So for the
Okay.
Army, our PEO, normally a 1 or 2 star general, was the authorizing official. But
Oh,
usually it's
cool.
a government lead that gets designated that authority, and then that
Okay.
person says, "Yes, I assume the risk for this system and its usage."
Uh, so this authority to operate is specific to governments?
Um, yeah, it is definitely federal DoD government process. There are some private companies that do leverage it because
Okay.
all of the processes that you follow, the frameworks and stuff, like, are a good starting point to use. But it is definitely really focused on federal DoD military.
Fascinating. Super cool. So an authorizing official is a government lead who accepts the risk.
Yes.
Cool. And then a couple times now, risk management framework has come up. So that's the next thing I'd be excited to define, if that is okay with you.
Perfect. So
Okay, cool.
framework is your process to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your system. But
Sure.
God,
Confidentiality. What is the order important? Integrity,
just
confidentiality,
CIA.
CIA. Oh,
Confidentiality, integrity, availability. And I can go through each one.
okay. Well, let's go through, let's do confidentiality first, and then I'll write the other ones because I might want some room on the board here.
So confidentiality is the ability to ensure that only the right set of people can see your system's data and information and have,
Okay.
and only the right set of people have access to it.
Ensures that only right set of people have access to the system. Cool. I'm going to write your process to ensure in your system, or ensure your system has. That's better. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so we got C for confidentiality, I for integrity.
So integrity, that's ensuring that the data that you put into your system stays the same and it hasn't been changed, it hasn't been corrupted.
Okay, the data is not tampered with?
Yeah, it's not tampered with. That you can trust the data that's there, that if it says, this person's allergic to penicillin, yes, that person is allergic to penicillin. Or if it says that the person isn't, it says that. You can see why this would be really important in certain applications like health informations.
Oh my goodness, yes. Excellent. And A
Availability.
is availability.
That's just making sure that you can access the system when you need to, right? It's not blocked. It's not, you can get the information when you need to, and your job.
Ensures the system is always up and running.
Yep. When needed.
I like that addition.
Yeah. Because there might be times where it doesn't need to be up and running, but when the operation calls for it, it needs to be there and available.
So the authority to operate, someone wants to use a system in the authorizing officials network, and then that official gives permission, gives authority to operate to somebody. And then the risk management framework, how does that relate to authority to operate?
So the process in order to get an authority to operate is go through the risk management framework process.
Okay. Okay. And then to get ATO, is it very common to use this acronym?
Yes.
Okay, so it almost is weird to say like authority to operate all the time because people just say ATO.
Yes, and there's also other types of authorizations you can get out of the risk management framework process.
Okay.
Get a IATT, which is an interim authority to test. So sometimes you want to necessarily have it operate in the full live system, but you want to test things and it's going to interact with the live system. It's just not going to perform, actual operations. So you get that IATT because you don't want to put a system that could corrupt your live system when you're trying to test it and verify it and make sure it works.
Cool. So is that something you want to capture? Are the other things that go through risk management framework, is that related today, or is that just kind of some bonus material?
Let's go through the RMF process. That is really the bread and butter of how you get there.
So RMF is risk management framework. And is that something that people just say RMF all the time?
Yes.
That makes sense because risk management framework is quite a mouthful.
But it's definitely just a way to manage risk of your system and understanding the risk. of your system.
This seems like good for any, like not, like I understand that it really comes into play for highly regulated stuff, but it makes sense for a lot of systems, it seems like,
Oh
to be
yeah.
able to make that assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, and like the RMF process and all the different steps and controls, I think it is just a good process that you could leverage. It can be lengthy, depending upon the organization and how they implement it and how mature they are at implementing it, but it's a good process.
All right. Thanks I'm drawing boxes now. So what are we talking about next, please? We're talking more about RMF.
Let's talk about the steps of RMF.
The steps of RMF. Because it's a process, and a process has steps.
Yes.
Cool.
Oh, so the first steps that they just kind of added, or they added within the last couple of years, is a prepare step. This was actually added on because the process is it can touch so many parts of your organization. The prepare step pretty much kind of prepares the organization for just starting the process, getting all the right people together, getting all the right people brought in, assigning various roles.
It's like when you're cooking, you should like set out all your ingredients before you start, because you don't want to get mostly through your recipe and realize you're out of something.
Yeah, and I love that example because part of also prepare is just understanding the recipe, understanding what is the system you're accrediting. So part of creating that sort of accreditation boundary also in that prepare step. What am I accrediting? What is those systems? What is the edge of that accreditation boundary? What's in the boundary, what's out of the boundary?
So ATO accreditation, is that a proper term?
Yes.
Cool. I'm going to write that because I help it all stick together. ATO accreditation.
Yep.
Okay, so first you prepare by understanding the system that's seeking ATO accreditation.
Yep.
Cool. And what next?
Okay, now you go through a process called categorization. And so this step is where you look at what's going through your system. So what kind of information you have to protect. And then that's where you determine your CIA levels: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Yes.
So you're looking at the data specifically that flows through your system.
Correct. Either it's going to flow through, it's going to store, it's going to process.
Okay. So the data in your system, regardless of what it's doing.
Yep. And there's multiple processes in order to execute that. So I know in the DoD, we use what's called the information type survey. And essentially, it goes through some NIST policy where they've looked at different information types and made a recommendation for what the CIA level should be. So, for example, if you have health-related data, right? So let's say things that would be covered by HIPAA, your confidentiality would be like a high, but your integrity and availability would be like a moderate, as it aligns to
fascinating.
Right. So yeah, depending on what the information is, and those levels are in line with how you need to protect and what rules you use to protect that information.
I have a question. I think we need to unpack the last statement you just said. Like, is that part of the categorization step? But first, before that, what does the word categorization mean? I feel like I've heard it like in relation to blood vessels, like categorizing of.
Oh, category, like categorization.
Oh, okay. I just totally thought it was a new word, vocabulary word I hadn't heard before. That's how far out of my knowledge level we are. So categorization.
Yeah.
Okay. Cat.
So you're just kind of categorizing, like, what information is going through my system? How should I protect it?
So first, look at what's in your system. Second, determine the CIA level for each type of data. Probably not for the whole system, right?
Every single data that would go through your system, processed by your system. So there's a list that is based upon some of the NIST policies.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially you follow that list. Like, so there's already been a group that has gone together, thought of different information types and said, how should I categorize these so we understand how to protect it? And you would fill out that, and then you also have the choice to not use that categorization, because you can go higher, you can go lower. So let's say you say, you know what, because of the environment I know I'm going to be in, I might want to make sure that, I want to increase availability from low to moderate. That phase and that step of RMF, you kind of make those trades, discussion choices.
So for the categorization step, you look at the data in your system, you determine the level for each data type, and then you determine how you want to protect each data type.
Yes.
Okay, cool. This is fascinating. All right, that's step 2, right?
Yep.
Cool. And what's step 3?
All right. Now there is a whole bunch of controls. And now you're going to select the controls that are tied to your CIA determination. So depending upon what your CIA determination, that will trigger which controls apply to you. So let's say if you had a CIA level of high, those controls, there could be essentially almost 2,000 controls you'd have to implement.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot of controls, a lot of control families, a lot of different piece parts of that.
So we're saying controls is step 3. What's the verb for that? Is implementing controls step 3? Implementing controls?
Well, no.
Okay.
We're just to select.
Select controls.
Yeah, because you're going to use your CIA from the categorization. You're going to select controls, because now you're going to tailor which controls might apply to your system or not. So for instance, let's say you have a completely virtual system. There's a whole family of controls that talks about media protection. If your system doesn't have actual media, doesn't have, disk and, other hardware devices, then that media protection set of controls may not apply to you. There are some controls that also talk about, other kind of hardware components that may not apply for you. So when you're going through this select step, you're kind of figuring out which ones don't apply to you.
So you take the CIA determination and maybe the data type like media, and with those two pieces input, then you decide what control is appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know in the DoD it's more of a tailoring out, because a lot of it is so controlled with regards to it's like where you enter a lot of this information is a system called EMAS in the DoD. Once you put in the CIA set the CIA determination, it will literally spit out, here are all the controls that apply to you. Then you have
Ah,
to step of, this one doesn't apply, this one doesn't apply, this one doesn't apply. You don't have
okay.
that flexibility of, hey, I'm going to choose not to do this one. It is going to give you the full list of all the ones you have to do. But that's
Uh-huh.
specific to how the DoD does it. Other
Uh-huh.
agencies do it slightly different.
Uh, Fascinating. So do you think it's more accurate? So do you think my earlier statement of like you take your CIA determination and your data type and then determine what controls are appropriate is
Yeah.
still accurate? Okay. I'm going to keep it consistent. And then determination. And then the CIA determination, there's one for each data type in your system, right?
Yeah. And then, I mean, at
Mm-hmm.
the end of categorization, you will have a sort of summarized one. So, like, you go through what's called, you essentially like say, I'm going to look at all of my confidentialities, and you take the high watermark of whatever your confidentialities were. So if you had two confidentialities that were moderate, but one was high, then your system is
Mm-hmm.
high. And then that gets into the selecting the controls that would drive which controls you have to apply. And then in select, you're pretty much tailoring those controls to your system.
I have will you tell me what an example of a control is? Like, give me an example of a control.
Sure, there are a lot of various families of controls. So
Uh-huh.
there's a family of access controls, and that really kind of goes into who has access, how do they have access, ensuring that only the right people have access. There's a whole family of controls that talks about auditing, which is collecting data about your system in order to determine, in order so that you have, indicators of compromise. Um, there's tons of different rules of what you can check for your system. There's configuration management, like how do you approve
Mm.
your system? But
Mm-hmm.
there's tons and tons of families and security checks that all have to get sort of put together.
I like that.
And then if you
That
have
helps me.
And if you have
Mm-hmm.
other types of information in your system, let's say you have privacy information, let's say you have health information, there are additional controls that even get added on top of that. So the amount of security controls, those safeguards, um,
Uh-huh.
it can really multiply to be a lot.
Wow. I imagine once we talk about the steps, we'll start to talk about how to manage that volume later. Yeah. Okay. So, cool. So step 3, select the controls, take the CIA determination and the data type and decide what controls are needed. And then I think you kind of said step 4 is to then apply the controls. Is that correct?
Yeah, now you're implementing. So yes, you're applying those controls.
How many steps are there?
7 altogether.
Okay. How am I doing on board space based on what you want to tell me?
Um, I think we're okay.
Okay. All right. So apply controls and tell me about apply controls.
Um, Essentially, it's doing the engineering work of going through the controls,
Oh,
applying it, making sure it's engineered in, making it part of your system. So, for instance, like, let's talk about auditing. Like, hey, I need to understand my system, how it's going to be used, and what data do I need to audit in order to determine indicators of compromise, make sure that's documented, make sure that auditing system works, that's collecting the data at the frequency that's required. Um,
wow.
so a lot of all those different things. So like access control, hey, I need to tie this to something that manages accounts so that, only the right people can access it. and how do I integrate that with my system of systems? Because maybe that access control system could be part of your system, it could be not part of your system, but all that needs to be engineered into your system, and then documented into all of these controls, and pretty much like every single one of those safeguards, the potentially up to like over 2,000,
Uh-huh.
all of those are verbosely documented, every single one.
So can you tell me an example of when, like, there's a system that's seeking ATO accreditation? Like, what kind of system is seeking from this accreditation from whom? What's an example of that?
It could be as simple as this, as a laptop, or it could be as
Ah,
complicated as a satellite system.
okay.
It could be all the command and control systems that that our military use. It could be your network infrastructure. It could
Fascinating.
pretty much anything that's going to hold and process data and information you care about.
So if it's a satellite system or something on the more complex side, is it common for like a fully formed system to later, after it's already created, to then go and seek this? This seems like so complex that it should be like built into the system as it's being built in the first place, as opposed to taking a system that already exists and then trying to add this stuff to it.
Well, ideally, yeah, you definitely should shift security left, right? This should be
Uh-huh.
of the requirements of what you're building into the system as you're
Uh-huh.
building and designing it. But the
Uh-huh.
R process was created where it can be applied against new systems as well as its existing systems. So you
Cool.
can always start at any of these processes, at no matter what the stage of development your system's at.
Excellent. Cool. This is fun. All right. Is this good for step 4? Apply controls, do the engineering work of applying controls.
Yep.
Great.
All right. Now you've applied it. You've documented
Mm-hmm.
it. You have all your information, because part of that is also like make sure your policies are documented. So like not only are you
Mm,
doing the thing, but you document
mm-hmm.
how you do the thing, right?
Yeah.
So now you're going to assess it.
I'm thinking about how I want to do 5, 6, 7. I think I'll do this. 5, assess controls.
Yep.
Or are you assessing the system?
You're assessing the system, but you're assessing the system via the controls.
Okay.
Um,
Excellent.
but essentially, usually what they would do is they would get an external organization,
Hmm.
someone who is not under the authority of who owns the system.
That's wise.
Though sometimes it is kind of under the same org. Different organizations do it differently. But yeah, an independent body comes in and looks at all your controls and reviews it and verifies it.
Controls are viewed by an independent body.
Yep, reviewed by an independent body. And that could be like a week-long process where they're sitting with the engineers, they're sitting with the management, they're sitting with operators, and they're going through each part. Some of it is they're looking at technical details. Some of it is an interview. So like so let's say it's configuration management. They might say, okay, like, do you understand the configuration management process? Because they're
Mm-hmm.
not only just trying to see like, hey, this had a specific setting and I need to verify it has that setting. A lot of it is also ensuring that people know the processes, understand the processes,
Oh.
following it.
So it's like not only assessment, but also kind of education.
It's verifying education. There is an awareness and training family as well, to make sure you're your people to
Ah,
how to operate, use, and securely use your system. So
fascinating.
you could, you know, you could pass the control for doing a certain thing, but if your people that are being interviewed during that assessment don't understand the process, you could fail that part of the control. So
Okay.
it's like,
Fascinating.
yeah, it's a mix.
So we said do the engineering work of applying controls, but it could also be training work.
Yeah, it's just making sure all that is there. Um, this processes that you have processes documented and you teach them and people are following it, because some of those controls, like, they're looking for evidence of following. So like some of the training controls, like, okay, I need to, like, you said that you're going to train your people on this, show me your evidence list.
Yeah.
And that's literally their check, like, you have a process for this, does your process have all of these parts to it? So it's very granular. um One of the things that we didn't go into about applying controls is that it's not just the controls. There are some other piece parts to it as well. So
Okay.
there's hardening recommendations um, that will come from vendors and the DoD. This is specific to DoD. The DoD will review it, verify it, and those are STIGs. So that's your security technical invitation guidance. So operating systems will have STIGs. And so it's a special file format, and all
Uh,
that gets put together as part of the
so so as complex as it seems, it's actually more complex than what we're representing here.
yeah, it is definitely more parts to it, because that's more of a really technical, like, I need to make sure your operating system has this configuration set to 0, and they're going to go there, like, your assessor is going to go in, look over that STIG checklist, and then look at every single little bitty part.
That it makes sense to me. Like when there's stuff like medical records or people's, like you said, their insulin, I believe, is on the line. Like you can't take any risks.
No, you really can't. Or it's a firing system. Like, you really don't want a miscalculation there.
Yeah. All right. What's our step 6?
All right, this one is easy. It's the authorization step. And essentially, that's when the AO reviews the details that came out of the assessment review, and then he signs off for you to have an authority to operate.
So a human, the authorizing official reviews, what do they review exactly?
So as part of that assessment process, the validator will create a report summarizing their findings. So like, hey, of the 2,000 checks and STIGs, here we found that, there's 50 open findings, and here's how they are, and here's here's how we evaluate them, whether these are low findings, it's not that big of a deal, just fix them, in your appropriate time, or hey, these are high findings, or these are moderate findings, and that will drive when you should fix them, the time frame that you should fix them. But essentially, that's that authorizing official is getting a report, he's looking at it, he's analyzing it, and he's making that, yes, I can sign off on the risk for this. There are instances, depending upon the agency and how they do rules. I know in the Army, if your system has a risk of high, your authorizing official may not have the ability to sign it. So it could be too high of a risk, and then that would drive where someone else has to sign off as the authorizing official or evaluate it, and there's like a separate process for that.
So step 6 is authorization. Authorizing official reviews the assessment report. This assess controls ends in a report.
Yep.
And then if they're happy, they issue the ATO.
Yep. They sign it.
report is made.
Yep.
Cool. And then you said there's a step 7. There's 7 steps, right?
Yep. Step 7 is monitor. It's like I have the ATO.
Ah.
It doesn't stop there. I got to monitor,
Uh-huh.
make sure that my system stays within that risk level that I just looked at and assessed and everything else.
That makes sense. And who monitors it?
Probably like it's basically like a list of everyone. I mean, the authorizing official will monitor it. Then there's other roles that we can kind of talk about, like the people who get involved in this work above the authorizing official. Um, so the people who make the baselines for the system. So let's say you're doing
Mm-hmm.
an update, your new vulnerabilities come out every day, you're doing new scans, that gets analyzed on a regular basis. So it could be engineers and then a group of folks who I guess are the unsung heroes, in my opinion, of this process are the information system security operators and officers and information system security managers. And I would love to talk about them next.
Excellent. This is fun. Okay, so we have the steps of RMF. Yes. So I'm gonna kind of delineate space on the board. How do I want to do that? Okay, and we're gonna talk about the unsung heroes. We're gonna sing. There will be sung by the time this is over.
Yes. Because this is where VMware, these are people that, the VMware really helps and helps
Okay.
support for.
So we're talking about job titles now. So what I'm trying to think about the heading I want for this section. So we're talking about 2 different job titles, you said, right? And tell me a little bit about them to help me make a heading.
I mean, they're the ones that put all the body of evidence and the data and pull all this together.
So the leaders of RMF, the RMF process or ATO accreditation.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to kind of articulate them. I mean they're the executors. They're the ones in charge of making sure it happens. I know in the DoD we get appointment orders, so you're
Uh-huh.
this role and you're essentially responsible for making sure all these steps are being executed and documenting all of these steps. And you can imagine with how many controls it is. It
Uh-huh.
um, it is very intense work. So having a human document, 2,000 responses to 2,000 questions
Oh my goodness.
them and getting it all straight in their head um, with all of that. It is definitely a lot, but they're the ones responsible for ensuring all of this is put together. And different organizations have different ways they do that. Some people use databases, some people use spreadsheets, um, but it is a lot of work to keep straight in your head. And most ISSOs have multiple systems. So it's that many controls times how many systems and just being able to pull all that data together.
So tell me those 2 job titles again and what they do, if that's okay.
So the information system security officer is really the one that's doing a lot of the big data entry and working with the system owners to ensure that these requirements are put into the system, that it's being assessed. They coordinate the activities of those validators. They help write some of the policies and processes. And then the information system security manager will work out.
Do you want me to capture some of those job duties here? I guess I want your input since we're running lower on space, or should we just write their titles?
I would just write their titles.
Okay, cool.
Right now.
Okay, and then what's the next one, please?
Information System Security Manager. Um, they're pretty much the ones in charge of the ISSOs, so they'll have multiple ISSOs that could be working for them. So they kind of coordinate at the more of a higher level. They'll review those packages. That gets put to that body of evidence. They make sure that it's consistent. They just coordinate support for those efforts. But all of these roles are get are part of the set of people that have to review all the data and say that it's good before
Mm-hmm.
we even get to the authorizing official.
Got it. Cool.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about one of one of the key points of my role as a modern compliance architect is that we provide support to the ISSOs and the ISSMs. Our job is really to make sure they have the data they need based upon the categorization, based upon the controls they have to implement, based upon that security guidance, and making sure they have the data they need to understand how our products might impact their system and their risk. So we provide hardening guidance, which we have documented in a stake checklist file as well as other documentation.
Uh,
And yeah,
so your title is a modern compliance architect,
yes,
and are modern compliance architects external to the organizations they're supporting?
um, yes, we are VMware. We're not part of the client's org.
Okay. Is this job title unique to VMware?
I'm not sure. I know I've never heard of it before I got to VMware.
Right
And
on. Okay.
and there's only 4 of us in the company right now.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I think what created the concept of modern compliance architect is um, VMware was working with these various clients. They were creating these solutions for them. And then all of a sudden they had this blocker where they were like, oh, sorry, I can't use it. I didn't get the ATO.
Oh, okay.
And it was literally like, how do we solve this problem? And then the
Okay.
concept of modern compliance architecture is like, we're that helper to make sure you go from, hey, I'm showing you these great products in VMware. I'm showing you
Mm-hmm.
how you can use it, how it can make your operations, easier, meet your requirements. But then you can't actually put it into your live system. And we want to ensure that our products are sticky. We want to make sure that our products get used. And if you don't have
Yeah.
ATO, your products don't get used. So,
Mm-hmm.
we definitely spend a lot of time and investment with regards to making sure that our products are compliant, that we are able to articulate, what findings there are, and putting all that data together for our clients so they can put together their ATO package that can then go
Mm-hmm.
by a validator that can then go to an AO and get signed off and actually used. I mean, that's really the key is getting it to where you can use the product in your operational environment.
And that makes a ton of sense to me because once you go through this process, you don't have to do it again. So it's not like you have the same group of people
Oh,
going through this process over and over again, right? Or do
yeah,
you?
yeah, you gotta keep doing it.
Yeah. So
So,
you gotta, is that part of, well,
yeah,
monitoring, just make sure it stays.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
monitoring. So I mean, there's 2 aspects of that. So there's the regular process. So most ATOs um, can be up to 3 years. You can
Uh-huh.
get a lower amount if your system is riskier. So let's say
Okay.
you have a lot of risk in your system. They could say, I'm not going to give you a 3-year ATO. I'm going to give you a year ATO because I want in a year, I want to come back and reassess
Uh-huh.
you again and make sure
Yeah.
you actually fix the things that you said you were going to fix. Um,
Yeah.
but essentially, the ideal and what everyone's trying to move towards is the concept of a continuous ATO. And DoD has
Okay.
pushed out guidance for the concept of that. But
Uh-huh.
really, it's you're always looking at the data, you're always providing scans, you're creating this process where part of the development team is looking at those vulnerabilities and fixing them. You're not waiting for the ISSO or M to tell you, hey, I found something wrong with your system, and being able to kind of look at that and always make that, hey, we're still good. And therefore, I don't need an ATO that expires in 3 years. My ATO never expires as long as
Yeah.
I follow a documented process. And I know DoD is starting to move forward with that. The Navy and the Army, Marine Corps, they all have initiatives driving toward that. And
Mm-hmm.
they're getting there.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. So, do you want to say more? I know you said with your words more specifically what you do as a modern compliant architect. Right now, I just have very general things like support ISSOs and ISSMs and help her through the RMF process. Do you want to be more specific about what that means exactly?
Yeah, so we go into this concept of like, okay, here's this VMware product, here's how it's
Mm-hmm.
secured. We'll walk through each of the security checks. We'll
Mm-hmm.
walk through those RMF controls and what's compliant and not compliant. We'll provide them that data so that and then have those conversations with the ISSOs and ISSMs so they understand it. Because you got to realize the
Mm-hmm.
ISSMs, they probably have a multitude of systems and every technology is new. Having that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
set of people that can talk to them in their language, that can help interpret, this product and its compliance levels and what that means to the overall risk and architecture of your system. That's really the whole purpose of the modern compliance architect. It's to help those unsung heroes that are pulling all
Mm-hmm.
this together, and kind of,
So,
yeah.
to be clear, so you're taking a VMware product that's doing something that's not related to this process, and then you're talking about how that particular product does relate to this process. Is that correct? Or is there a particular VMware product that helps you get through the RMF process, and that's what you're teaching?
Yeah, there's no product that really helps.
Okay.
Teams of people that help pull together that body of
Okay.
evidence and work towards um fixing
Okay.
products. So like to a certain extent, I mean, we do look at the controls for all of our products. We do look
Uh-huh.
at how we're evaluated against each of those controls. There's teams of people that do that and then say,
Yeah.
hey, we need to make sure we're doing this part. Okay, let's go back into the system, and it gets added to the backlog for our developers, and they go in and fix things.
Okay. That great. That helps me understand. Cool. It sounds like a fun job. Is it fun? Do you have fun?
Um, to me, the funnest part of this is like I've been in ISSO, ISSM, and I
Ah.
understand how painful it can be. It often can be siloed in a lot of organizations because they say, "Oh, it's it's ATO work. This team does it," and they don't
Uh-huh.
necessarily involve everyone. So being that person that can come in and say, "Oh, here, I'm here to help. I'm here to help you understand, this technology and how it's hardened and how the security works and how it's compliant and how it integrates with the rest of your systems." Because I mean, if you have 10 systems and 2,000 controls each, um,
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
a lot of burnt out
Yeah.
government folks. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm definitely really happy that I get to sort of give back to that, burnt out person who just says, "Oh my gosh, not another new technology. It's documented 2,000 controls for what we have now. Why are you throwing this new thing at me?" It could definitely be overwhelming to have that role. They're really hard workers. It's a lot of work to do. Um, and especially and if you're in a classified environment, all this has to be in a
Hmm.
classified system. So um, not
Wow.
everyone's room looks nice. Um,
Yeah. Cool. What would you like to teach next?
Well, that's really the RMF process. I mean, there's probably some points that we really didn't get to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we can talk about one of the key things out of this process is when you do your analysis, you do
Mm-hmm.
create something called a POAM, a plan of action and milestones. And that's a set of actions that you have to do in order to fix vulnerabilities. So, like, hey, I'm going to assess this control, but this control is open. So, let's say you didn't have a configuration management process. You would create a plan of action and milestone, which would document all of the controls in your system. Sorry, document all the open findings in your system.
So it's
POAM.
oh, the O is in there. Okay, got it. The of. I was
Yeah,
like, you didn't say PAM, but you didn't. I couldn't quite get it. Plan of actions and milestones.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm a little behind since I didn't get the very beginning. So first, let me write this down. Plan. So, will you define it for me again?
Plan of actions and milestones.
Mm-hmm. And like, what is it?
Essentially, it's your list of security to do for your system.
Okay.
So, hey, I assessed this particular control. I looked at it, and for instance, you don't have a configuration management plan, or
Hmm.
you don't have the roles for configuration for configuration management allocated. Like, who are decision makers, who approves changes, who
Mm-hmm.
changes are distributed. Um, so that would create a vulnerability in your system, and you would then document that. And a lot of a good portion of what the ISSO and ISSMs execute is like that list of, hey, here's they would talk to their leaders and explain what's open, and then that way that leader can put resources against those POAM items and actually go to fix it.
So this plan of action and milestones, does it get generated as part of the assess controls step?
Yeah. And I mean, it can also be created when you're applying the controls and you realize, oh, I can apply these, but I can't apply these yet. Or I'm not going to apply these until next quarter because that based upon my resources. It's like when you do that sort of self-assessment of all of your controls, it definitely it's where you just kind of like it's your grade of how well you've done all the controls.
Okay. So I'm a highly regulated industry, and I want to incorporate a new piece of software, a beautiful piece of VMware software into my system. But
Mhm.
before I'm allowed to do that, I need an authority to operate.
Correct.
And so to get that authority to operate, I have to go through all of these steps, which can be vast and deep and hard and long. And so as I go through these steps, first I prepare, I understand the VMware system that's seeking the accreditation. And I'm sure as a modern compliance architect, you're helping a lot with that piece.
Yeah.
And then you're categorizing the system and the data in the system. So you're understanding, okay, this new piece of software, this is how the data is flowing through, and these are the data types, and this is like where each piece of data lives, like where it's stored, and you have
Mhm.
a really deep understanding of that.
Mhm.
And then you look at the CIA level to figure out how sensitive each piece of data is, and
Yeah.
so that's like and how to protect it. And so that's the CIA determination. And then you have controls, and those controls are specific, like they seem like industry standard ways for how to protect certain types of those seem to be generated, right? And
Yeah.
who or what is generating those controls?
So it follows NIST policies. So it follows 800-53. And so once you have your CI determination, that will drive which of those NIST policies apply.
Okay. Wait, who's generating it?
The list of controls is
Uh-huh.
set by policy.
Oh, whose
So
policy?
the whole RMF process is
Uh-huh.
came out of the Office of Management and Budget saying we need to protect our systems, and then they
Okay.
um, allocated an agency, the NIST agency, to write how we should do it for all of our systems if you're federal or DoD. And so NIST
Okay.
policies drives,
Okay.
this, or president directives too.
So when we say the controls are determined, they're determined by a governing body of like for like Department of Defense or
Generic set is made across the board, and then your CIA level will determine which ones apply.
okay.
So it's more of like, oh, my CIA is high, moderate, moderate. So here, this control, I will look, someone, if they were doing it manually, would look through NIST 800-53 and then say, oh, this one applies, this one applies, this one doesn't apply, this one applies. And then there's also overlays, and that would also drive which ones apply. But yes, someone's looking through those policies and saying, this is the full list I need to implement.
Cool. And so so that's how you determine what controls are needed, and you might remove some from the list that gets generated. And then you need to do the engineering work or the training work of applying the controls and then document how they were applied.
Yep.
And maybe during that step, your plan of action and milestones will get created of security to-dos in your system.
Yeah, you're always going to have a POAM. It's always going to be kind of like a running thing. You're going to have new things that are open, new things that are closed. It's going to be a living document. I mean, as of most of your policies and controls should be a living document. You should always be updating them with regards to what your system baseline looks like.
Okay.
I could add an extra little wrench in here too.
Oh, great.
So in addition to that, some things may not be truly control dependent. Like, let's say you have your system out and about. You can have a specific threat or vulnerability that, gets levied against your system. That wouldn't necessarily be a control. That would just be like an active threat. Those would get your plan of actions and milestones as well. And so you would document that so that you have a place to track, hey, this is my system. I saw this thing happen in the field. I now figure out how to fix it and prevent it, and then eventually close it out. So it could be something as, hey, I need to upgrade to the new version so that this vulnerability is not there anymore. Or it could be something else. But yeah, your POAM is your living document of, hey, this is what's open on my system and my actual list of things to do.
Cool. It makes me think of a punch list, like for a construction. Like here are all the construction things that still need to be done. Yep. So this is a living document and might be especially related to steps 4 or 5. Once the controls are applied, the engineering work's done, it's documented, then they're assessed by an independent body and a report is made. And then that report is given to the authorizing official and that person, if they like it, they're happy, they issue the ATO, the authority to operate. So then presumably maybe there's technically a step 6.5 where the software gets installed and used, right?
Yeah, once you have your ATO, then you can actually put it on live network and operate it. Yes.
Yeah. And then step 7 is monitor once it's live to make sure it's staying compliant.
Yeah, and there's some nuances in there. Like once you get that report from the validator, the ISO ISM takes that report, they'll update their listing of the controls and its statuses. They might, like the assessor could find new findings that you didn't, implement, that you didn't know about. That would also get updated in the POAM. So there's definitely a lot of documentation of what's going on in the system before the AO finally signs off on it.
And
so
you
have like a couple of weeks or a month between a validator giving you a report and the AO actually be able to sign off on it. And depending upon the agencies, they might have other folks look at it and review it before it gets to the AO. So like the validator team could look at it. There's also security control assessor organizations that might also look at it, and then the AO will eventually sign off on it. So you could have
that makes
a
sense.
package ready to go, and it could be like a month or so before it actually gets signed by the AO for you to actually use.
From start to finish, what's a normal, like start to software gets installed? What's
a year?
Range? A year, okay.
Be 6 months.
So that makes sense.
I mean, so if you, there are definitely some ways to sort of help get this done faster if you're a mature enough organization. So let's say you know that you have, you're always going to have like a high, moderate set of controls, right? And since some of the controls are very policy based and how my organization does things, you could make a set of common controls and do all of that work already.
Oh,
yeah. So if you do configuration management consistently across the board, well, every ATO could leverage that same process. I don't have to figure out how to do that. It's just a matter of documenting it from one ATO to the other. There are some concept of actually creating like a common control provider ATO. So like everything I do common, I can create a common ATO, a common control provider ATO, and then all of my other ATOs would, can inherit those controls. And therefore the ATO process is really going to be focusing on the actual technical portions of this, of it. As opposed to like the whole 2000, like maybe you're really looking at half. So we could talk about in the concept of inheritance a little bit. So you could have multiple ATOs have relationships between one another where some of the risk or some of the controls are being satisfied in one ATO and the other ATO would point to it. You have instances where both ATOs have the same AO, or you're going to have instances where the AOs are completely different. It really all depends upon your system, which controls you're inheriting, and how those relationships kind of pan out.
This is interesting. So I would like to capture this better. So there's like, at first you were just saying there could be a common control provider ATO and more complex ATOs can inherit those ATOs. Maybe I should say those ATOs. And then you went on to say like more about relationships between ATOs.
So essentially the common control provider sets a set of what those answers for those controls. And then you would have a separate ATO that maybe it just has the VMware products. And then they would inherit from that common control provider ATO.
Cool.
So they'd be two separate ATOs, but they'd be a relationship between them.
Is this accurate what I've written? Common control provider ATO, like more complex ATOs can inherit those common control ATOs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
Cool.
Now, it doesn't even have to just be a common control provider, right? So let's say, for instance, you have an organization that's in charge of the network. And part of that network components is your Active Directory, like that system that says, that gives you access control and talks about users and roles of people using your system. If your system is only an application and you're a separate org, well, you'll get an ATO for your system. But because your system is going to operate on that network, you would inherit controls from that other ATO. and it would be specifically the access controls, right? Um,
Okay.
so that's another good example of this concept of inheritance. Another thing, another like example of it, another terminology they use for it is like the shared responsibility model, is cloud. Clouds get
Uh-huh.
their authorizations, right? So when you talk about, there are controls that talk about physical controls, so physical and your environment controls. So there are controls that talk about, making sure heating and cooling and fire suppression is there. Um,
Uh-huh.
but since if you have your system and it's in the cloud, well, you're not touching any of that. So you
Yeah.
inherit from the that cloud
Oh,
provider. So that's another
interesting.
example of inheritance and how you would use it, and how it all kind of come together.
Inheritance. So what's interesting to me about that last example is that you're talking about inheriting an ATO from an entirely separate organization.
Yeah, and that's in the cloud instance, that's definitely normal. And even in other instances, that's completely normal, because how the programs are split up aren't necessarily
Uh-huh.
aligned to how they all operate and work together. So like you can have an organization that's in charge of the network and the firewalls and
Uh-huh.
monitoring of the network, but then you have another organization that's in charge of the radios that might touch that network, or the applications that would be in the computers and the server infrastructure that would be on the network, and those could all be separate orgs. And so you definitely be inheriting different controls, especially like access control, anything related to the network, firewall rules, which are security protection mechanisms. All of those would kind of all come together in via inheritance relationships, because if your system is not doing that thing,
Uh-huh.
articulate how it's getting those protections.
Why would my organization trust an ATO that was like issued by some authorizing official that I don't know?
That's a good question. Ideally, the whole process is regulated so that you should. Um, but yeah, that's a hard question to ask. So like, there's definitely that's ideally you should, because that's how you're operating.
Uh-huh. Is there some sort of governing body that gives authority to the authorizing official that people agree on? Who
Um,
gives the authorizing official authority?
there is a designation process. I don't recall off the top of my head like who gives them that appointment, but essentially everyone's kind of giving that appointment order. So everyone is designated to have that responsibility, and the process is set up that you're supposed to do that, and you're supposed to trust everyone's ATOs.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the army, like the whole security controls assessor, you are all falling under, all of your ATOs are being assessed across the same way. Again, that's how
Mm-hmm.
the army does it. I don't know how other services do it. I'm still learning to deal with other services, which is also a fun part of being an MCA.
Yeah. Oh, I bet you're learning all the time.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
and everyone does this process slightly differently.
Uh-huh.
So it's like, okay, these people use this database, and these other organizations uses this database, and um, these organizations have these steps in their process before it can get to the AO. And the these people allow the validators to be part of the organization. These organizations, the
Uh,
validator is a separate command.
uh-huh.
Right? So it's all a mix of who does what, how, but what kind of all puts, clusters them together is the steps in the RMF process are all the same. The controls
Mm-hmm.
that are covered and defined by NIST are all the same. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but NIST, in their ingenuity, like they said, here are the basic steps, but you have flexibility in how you choose to implement them.
That's wise. That's. Will you tell me NIST, like your that acronym and that those words and what that is?
So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And that
And
was one I had
and
to look at my notes to remember what the acronym was.
I've an institute SDITUT. Um, do you have thoughts what you want to do with this space, or am I okay writing this here? Are
You're
we
good. I mean,
we're good? Okay.
I think there of the whole RMF process, this is a
Uh-huh.
good bulk of it. Like it's the
Okay,
steps,
cool.
some of these nuances, that's some of these key other points. It's a little bit of everything.
National Institute of Systems and Technology?
Sorry, standards and technology.
Standards and Technology.
Yeah. They do a lot of the risk management framework standards, but I know they do a bunch of others as well.
Standards and Technology. Okay, and then the acronym is NIST.
Yep. NIST.
And tell me about NIST, please. I'd like to write a definition.
Well, they are an organization that essentially puts out standards. They write all the policies for RMF. They do a lot of other policies as well. But pretty
Mm-hmm.
much the Office of Management and Budget, they're kind of they were the ones that were assigned the role of figuring out all of these processes, and then they charge
Mm-hmm.
that to NIST. And NIST is pretty much that governing org of what should the policies be, and there are tons of policies that are allocated that from like all of these steps each have their own policy that NIST has puts together, and a standardized of how to execute each one. So there's a policy for how you do categorization. There's various policies or controls. Even each control can have additional policies. There's policies on, how to do configuration management. And then there's specialized policies for how you secure different portions of the systems. So they are literally the folks that write everything that we're expected to follow.
Cool. How to do each NIST step and how to secure what?
How to secure your system.
Oh. And do they do the controls?
They write the controls. They write what those controls are and the definitions of them.
And
So
more, I'll say.
NIST 800-53. And then the categorization would be 800-60, I believe. Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Is there anything you'd like to say to fill up this last little bit of space?
I'm trying to think. What do we miss? Let's just talk about common misconceptions. And
Cool.
one, a lot of people think this is just a paperwork drill. It's really not.
Uh-huh.
It really should be integrated into your development process. You should have everyone involved. Um, it is a long process. But you have to get everyone sort of included. Another misconception is it's just the ISO and ISM's job to do this. I often will sit in meetings, or I have in the past, where it's like, hey, let's talk about, let's say program management, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the ISO or ISM, they're not the program managers. That's someone else. You know, the planning, you know, the instant response, you know, some of the logistics of how you utilize and fix your system. A lot of that is just it's not just the cyber folks' job to do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um,
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah, and for the folks that just think that, you know, it's just a paper drill, yeah, I just think those are just engineers who don't want to document what they're doing.
Yes, yes. Yeah, which is a lot of them, I believe. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you
That's
need,
not the fun part. Yeah.
yeah, it's not the fun part, but you need to be able to understand your system and your risk and what do you need to fix. I mean, if you don't have a place to start from, you know, how do you know what improvement looks like?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other common misconceptions?
Um, that your cyber people are going to be the ones that fix everything, and that if something's broken in your ATO, it's really their fault, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that everyone has buy-in to owning the problems and fixing the problems. Um,
Not just security's job to fix problems.
yeah. Um, and they often get like, hey, their fingers get pointed at like they're the people who tell us no. I mean, and I
Yeah.
ISO-ism tells you how to get to yes. Like here are the rules, here's how you leverage them, here's how you use them, here's how you ensure your system is designed well.
Mm-hmm.
Bring your cyber people in early, like bring them into the development process, so they're,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that they're that point of view is brought in. Because if you're bringing in after the system is designed, the ability to get any security fix
Yeah.
is almost impossible.
Cool. I it's just not great for culture anytime people are pointing fingers at each other. Like it's so much better when everyone feels like a team and a community.
Yes, it definitely is. I completely agree.
Do you feel any more common misconceptions you want to add?
Nothing I can think of. I think that's a good.
Okay. So the way this has been really, really fun and so fascinating, and I learned so much. The way we're going to close this out is I'm just going to walk back through everything and do a recap of everything you've taught me and us today.
Okay,
Does that sound good to you? Are we ready for the recap?
that sounds great.
Okay, let's do it. So, authority to operate, ATO, is an approval by an authorizing official to use a system in that authorizing official's live network. And so you talked about the authorizing official being a government lead who's willing to accept the risk.
Mhm.
And then what I maybe didn't understand right when I wrote this definition down that I understand now an hour later is that the system that's being used in the live network is likely to be a piece of software that's going to come into the network. And so we need an authority to operate this piece of software in the network. Is that accurate?
It could be a software, it could be hardware,
Mm.
it could be anything. Like it could be a network
Okay.
device. Um,
Okay. All right. So it's not just a piece of software, but okay. So ability to operate literally anything new that you're bringing into your system at all.
yep.
You need to go through this process, which makes a lot of sense. So
Mhm.
this process is called risk management framework. So this is a process to ensure that your system has CIA, which we use that acronym a lot, confidentiality, which ensures only the right set of people have access to the system, integrity ensures that the data is not tampered with, and availability, ensuring the system is available whenever it's needed. So to get this authority to operate, you have to comply with the risk management framework. And to comply with the risk management framework, you have to go through these 7 steps that we talked through.
Yep.
And before I get to the steps, I'll say they're the people in an organization who are the leaders of getting any new thing, getting ATO approval for any new thing that needs to be added to the system. These people are information system security officers and information system security managers. So those are the job titles of the people within an org that do it.
Yep.
And then we have a modern compliance architect such as yourself, and you come in from VMware and you support these two job titles as they go through this RMF process, which is pretty complex.
Yep.
So to go through the process, the first thing you need to do is prepare by understanding the system that's seeking the ATO accreditation. So in our case, it would be a piece of VMware software, but like you said, it could be a server or network or hardware, whatever.
Yep.
But first, understand it deeply. I likened it to a cooking show where you put all of your ingredients out to make sure you have everything you need before you start cooking. And then step 2 is categorization. So now, especially the categorization of data. So you're looking at all of the data in your system. How is it being moved around? Where is it being stored? And for each data type, you're determining the CIA level, and determining then using that CIA level will help you determine how you protect each data type. So that's a CIA determination. Mm-hmm. And so once you've made that CIA determination for each data type, then you need to select the controls that are needed for each data type. So you take that CIA determination and the data type and the National Institute of Standards of Technology will tell you, based on that information, it will tell you what kind of controls you should be implementing for that data type. Mm-hmm. Now, not every little thing that they output is something your system might need. So you can weed out some of those that aren't relevant for you, but anything that's relevant, you do need to implement. And so examples of controls would be like access controls, or maybe monitoring, or perhaps configuration management. Mm-hmm. So now you've determined what controls you need. So now you need to apply them. And that's most often going to be engineering work to apply it, but it could also be people training to apply it. So you need to apply those controls, and then you need to document how they're applied, how they're implemented, also maybe what you need to do to maintain the control, to keep it happy so it doesn't fall out of compliance later. So once that step 4 is done, then you need to assess the controls, and that's usually done by a completely independent body. So some orgs, you said, have a governing body within the org that will come do it, mm-hmm. or some orgs use a completely external human to come in and assess the controls. Or and team. At the end, or team. Okay, great. You heard my hesitation before I said human. Yeah, a team makes sense. So then the output of that step is that there's a report that's made that's after the assessment. Mm-hmm. And so that report then gets given to the authorizing official in the ATO definition, and that authorizing official will review the reports, and they can ask for changes at this step too. And then once that report meets their satisfaction, they sign off on it and they issue the authority to operate. And at that point, whatever it is, we'll say VMware software gets installed, but whatever it is, that now it's operating. The operate part can happen. And then once it's operating, then step 7 is to monitor it and make sure the system stays compliant. And you'll have to go through this ATO process on a regular basis to make sure whatever it is in your system stays compliant. And there, you said there's a move toward taking steps to make sure it's always in compliance instead of it being a manual process each time, which is cool.
Yeah, continuous authorization process.
Yeah. And then we talked about a plan of action and milestones called a POAM. It's like a poem, but it's POAM. Mm-hmm. And so it's a list of security to-dos written in limericks. No, I'm kidding. For your system. So it's a living document. It's always a running thing, and it's particularly pertinent to steps 4 and 5 when you're applying the controls and assessing the controls. So now an ATO, authority to operate, isn't one system that needs to get integrated into the larger system might be governed by lots of different ATOs. It might not just be one big ATO. And so we talked about the ATO inheritance. Mm-hmm. So you might have a common control provider ATO where I like to hear an Active Directory might have an ATO, and then that Active Directory might get used in a lot of different pieces of software. So all the software that uses that Active Directory can then use that Active Directory's ATO. They'll have to redo it over and over again, which is great. So basically, more complex ATOs can inherit the common control ATOs.
Yes.
And then what was interesting to me too is that you can inherit an ATO from an entirely separate organization. And you used cloud computing as an example of that. Your cloud provider will have ATOs that you can then lean on when you're getting permission to integrate whatever you need to into your system. And part of what makes that trust for why you would trust someone else's ATOs is that everyone's following these National Institute of Standard and Technology rules. And so this acronym is NIST, these NIST rules. And this is an organization that puts out the RMF processes and standards. So they have policies for like how to do every step. They have policies for how to secure your system. They're the ones who output the controls and tell you what controls. Those are standardized across organizations, what the controls will be. So NIST is really at the core of how all of this works. Everybody's trusting NIST and complying with NIST. Mm-hmm. And finally, we talked about some common misconceptions. So this is not just a paperwork drill. This is a very important thing. We use an example of people's medical lives are at stake, like someone's like insulin, how much they need to take. That's the kind of records that are being stored here, and there can't be any miscalculation or any mishandling or any vulnerability or very bad things can happen. So it's not just a paperwork drill. It's really important. And even though these two job titles, ISSOs and ISSMs, even though they're the ones in charge, it's not just their job and not just their problem to get all of this done. Like they're going to need to be able to ask stuff from other teams within the organization, and the team should be happy to help and be willing to pitch in to do their part. Yep. So it's a team effort. And then it's also when there are problems that are security related, it's not just security's job to answer those problems. Like again, like everyone should be helping out as much as they can. And it's a really good idea to bring in security at the beginning so that they can guide you as you go, so you don't go too deep in the wrong direction security wise. And I think that's everything. Is there anything you'd like to add?
There is one other common misconception that's like a pet peeve of mine. Sometimes people misinterpret categorization with classification, and they're not the same things.
Okay.
So classification could also drive additional rules and regulations. Like in the example we gave before about medical, you can have a high confidentiality for medical information, but that doesn't make it secret.
Okay.
So having a high system doesn't mean you have a classified system. It just means that's how you have to protect the information. There are separate rules and regulations with regards to how you deal with classified information and systems, all within the RMF process. So it's just different security controls that would get added to your system, but they're different.
That makes a lot of sense. Categorization is not equal to classification.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think we did it. This is the end.
Awesome.
So thank you so much to everyone who shared your time with us. And thank you so much for teaching us today. This has been wonderful. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you in this process. I think it's really cool.